What would you do if the person you trusted most in the world, the one you vowed to spend forever with, betrayed you most unimaginably? This is the story of a honeymoon that turned deadly, a love story that spiraled into a brutal tragedy, and a lie that would unravel a seemingly perfect life. Welcome to Dark True Crime Stories. Meet Alice and Nathan Steele. They were the couple everyone admired. Newlyweds, with smiles that could light up a room. Nathan, 32 years, was a successful corporate lawyer. Alice, 28 years, a charming woman, beautiful and intelligent, seemed like the perfect match. Together, they had built a life that others only dreamed of, a luxurious wedding, a dream honeymoon, and a future full of promise. To the world, they were perfect. To Nathan, Alice was everything. But beneath the polished image, Alice carried a secret, one that she had been hiding for months, long before the wedding. A secret so dark that if Nathan ever discovered it, it would destroy everything they had. This wasn't just about love. This was about obsession. And when Alice's secret finally bled into reality, it wasn't a love story that unfolded. It was a nightmare. Their honeymoon had been everything Nathan had dreamed of. A luxurious resort on a private beach, candles flickering in the soft evening breeze, and a new life waiting for them at the other end. The perfect getaway to celebrate their new beginning. Alice played her part flawlessly, always the doting wife, always the picture of affection. Nathan, unaware of the darkness creeping just beneath her smile, was lost in the magic of the moment. But Alice wasn't just basking in the luxury of her honeymoon. Behind closed doors, she had been planning, waiting for the right moment to execute a plan that had been months in the making. The day before Nathan's death, everything appeared normal. Nathan spent the afternoon exploring the resort, while Alice stayed behind, claiming she needed rest. She was alone, but she wasn't simply relaxing in the hotel room. No, Alice was preparing for something far more sinister. In the resort's kitchen, she made a quiet deal with the chef. She handed him a small envelope, one that seemed harmless but contained everything necessary for her plan to unfold. Alice wasn't here just for the honeymoon. She had come with a purpose. She had been planning this moment for months. The death of Nathan Steele wouldn't just be a tragic accident. It would be the culmination of years of hidden resentment, jealousy, and a dangerous obsession. Nathan never saw it coming. For him, the honeymoon was a dream come true. For Alice, it was the final act in a carefully staged play. The next night, Nathan settled into bed, unaware that his life would soon end in the most brutal way. He kissed Alice goodnight, exhausted from a day of sightseeing, and fell into a deep sleep. Alice stood beside him, her mind racing with the weight of what was about to happen. She wasn't nervous. She was resolute. This was no mistake. It had to be done. Alice's eyes flickered toward the glass of wine on the nightstand. Nathan had asked her to join him for a nightcap, but she declined, saying she was too tired. As he slept, she took the wine he'd left behind, filled it with a deadly substance, and set it back on the nightstand. She was careful. This had to be flawless. Alice didn't want Nathan's death to be quick. She wanted him to suffer, to understand the depths of her rage. She didn't want to be the helpless wife. She wanted to be the one in control, the one who decided when this game would end. When Nathan awoke in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, his eyes met Alice's. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't know that Alice had drugged him with a lethal dose of poison. He tried to speak, but his words came out in desperate gasps. "Alice, what's happening?" Her voice was steady, her eyes cold. She leaned over him, her face inches from his. "You thought you could control everything, Nathan," she whispered. "But I'm in control now. I always was." Nathan's body convulsed as the poison coursed through his veins. His eyes filled with disbelief, his world spinning into darkness. The last thing he saw before everything went black was Alice, standing above him, watching as he died. The next morning, the resort staff found Nathan's lifeless body, and Alice was already prepared. She played the role of the grieving wife perfectly. She claimed Nathan had suffered a heart attack in his sleep. The hotel staff, sympathizing with her, offered condolences, but deep down, no one suspected a thing. The authorities were quick to investigate, but Alice's story seemed airtight. Nathan had been healthy, the picture of fitness, the kind of man who would never show signs of illness. His cause of death appeared to be natural, heart failure, the doctors said. The police had no reason to doubt Alice's account. But something didn't sit right. There was something about Alice's calmness, her detachment. The detective assigned to the case, Detective Harris, had seen it before. He had witnessed the perfect lie, the way the killer could blend in with the grieving. And Alice, with her well-crafted story and seemingly perfect life, was far too perfect. The investigation went on for weeks. Alice was never a suspect. The police had no reason to doubt her story. But Detective Harris wasn't convinced. He began to dig deeper, looking into the details that others had overlooked. He found something small, but telling. The night before Nathan's death, Alice had been seen entering the kitchen, meeting briefly with the head chef. She'd been there longer than anyone had realized. And what did she do in that time? The chef, after some gentle persuasion, admitted to handing Alice a small package. It was a simple transaction, one that could easily be dismissed. But Harris knew better. This wasn't just a coincidence. Alice's perfect world was beginning to unravel. The detective had started asking the right questions, and the walls of the Steele family's house were starting to close in on her. Alice didn't realize that her secrets were beginning to surface. But the more she tried to control the narrative, the more she exposed herself. The authorities had uncovered surveillance footage from the hotel that showed Alice interacting with the chef. And just like that, the first crack in her flawless story had appeared. Detective Harris, relentless in his pursuit of the truth, uncovered the hidden footage from the night Nathan died. It was chilling. Alice had been alone in the room with Nathan, and just minutes later, the poison had done its work. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a honeymoon gone wrong. This was murder. The investigation led to a shocking discovery. A key piece of evidence, the wine glass. It had tested positive for poison. But it wasn't just any poison. It was a rare, potent substance that could be traced only to a specific source, the resort's kitchen. And now, Alice had nowhere to hide. The case against Alice was growing stronger by the day. The perfect wife, the grieving widow, was being exposed as a cold-blooded killer who had orchestrated her husband's death in the most calculated way. But the most chilling part of all was that, even as the walls closed in on her, Alice remained calm, almost eerily composed. She never once cracked, never once showed remorse. Was she the victim of a broken marriage? Or was she simply a woman who had taken everything into her own hands? But just as Alice's arrest seemed inevitable, a shocking twist occurred. Alice, the woman who had appeared to be in control of every aspect of her life, vanished. Gone without a trace. No note, no explanation, just a missing person and a trail that led nowhere. The authorities were left with more questions than answers. After Alice's disappearance, the authorities were left scrambling. They had gathered enough evidence to put her behind bars for the murder of her husband, Nathan Steele. The poison, the hotel staff's testimony, the surveillance footage, it all pointed directly to Alice. But she was gone, vanished. The police scoured every corner of the resort, hoping to find any trace of her. They even questioned the hotel staff and guests, but it was as if Alice had never existed. No one had seen her leave. No one had seen her since Nathan's death. The search for her intensified, but the deeper the investigation went, the more questions arose. It wasn't long before rumors started circulating. People began to whisper that Alice had never been the perfect wife everyone believed her to be. Some said she had been seen arguing with a man days before the honeymoon, someone who had no business being near the Steele family. Others claimed that Nathan had never been Alice's first love, that there had been others, and those others weren't just part of her past. They were part of her plan. As Detective Harris dug deeper, he uncovered more disturbing details about Alice's life. Her past wasn't as flawless as it seemed, and the more the detective uncovered, the clearer it became. Alice had been playing a dangerous game long before Nathan's death. Alice Steele wasn't just a woman who had killed her husband for money or out of passion. No, she had killed him because she had something to hide, something far worse than anyone could have imagined. As Harris reviewed Alice's financial records, he found discrepancies, large sums of money that had been withdrawn shortly before the honeymoon. And the name on those transactions? It was the same name as the man Alice had been seen within the weeks leading up to Nathan's death. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. Detective Harris was starting to understand Alice's motive. She had been living a double life, one where she was not only planning Nathan's murder, but also plotting her escape with her lover. Her husband, the man she had sworn to love forever, had been nothing more than a pawn in her game. And just when Harris thought the case couldn't get any more twisted, a breakthrough came. It wasn't the police who found Alice. It was a tip, an anonymous tip that led them to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of town. A place Alice had rented under an assumed name. Alice wasn't just hiding. She had been living in plain sight, evading the police with her carefully crafted disguise. But her days of running were numbered. As Harris arrived at the apartment, he could feel the weight of the investigation bearing down on him. He knew this was it, the moment they would finally catch Alice and end her reign of terror. The apartment was eerily quiet when Harris knocked on the door. No one answered. He knocked again, louder this time, his heart racing as his mind raced through the possibilities. What would they find inside? Would Alice still be there? Or had she already disappeared into the night once again? The door creaked open slowly, revealing a room that seemed too quiet for comfort. Inside, Harris found Alice, sitting by the window, her face blank, her expression unreadable. She wasn't surprised to see him. It was almost as if she had been waiting for him. "You found me," Alice said, her voice calm, even a little amused. She didn't flinch as Harris stepped into the room. He couldn't believe it. The woman who had killed her husband, the woman who had destroyed everything for the sake of her twisted desires, was sitting there like nothing had happened. Her demeanor was unervingly serene. "You've been running for so long," Harris replied. "But it's over now, Alice. We know what you did." Alice simply looked at him, her eyes filled with an icy calmness. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to escape. Instead, she said something that sent a chill through Harris's spine. "You don't understand," Alice whispered, almost to herself. "This was never about him. This was about me. I had to take control of my life. Nathan was just a casualty in my path." And with that, everything Harris thought he knew about Alice Steele started to unravel. What had begun as a story of jealousy and betrayal had transformed into something far more chilling. A woman willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way, even her own husband. But why? As Alice was arrested and taken into custody, Detective Harris couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he still didn't know, something that Alice hadn't yet revealed. She had been hiding something much darker than anyone could have imagined. And then, as if by fate, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Harris's team had been reviewing Alice's phone records and came across something that had been overlooked before: texts, messages, phone calls made in the weeks leading up to Nathan's death. They were to someone who wasn't just a lover. They were to someone with ties to powerful people, someone whose name carried weight, and someone who could make all of this disappear. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Alice wasn't acting alone. There were others involved. Powerful, dangerous people who would stop at nothing to protect themselves. And now Alice was in their debt. But just when it seemed like the case was coming to a close, Alice dropped a bombshell, a confession that would change everything. "There's more," Alice said, her voice now shaky, a rare crack in her icy exterior. "You think you know everything, but I'm just the beginning. The truth, the real truth, is far more dangerous than you think." Alice's confession had sent shockwaves through the investigation. She claimed that her murder of Nathan wasn't the end. It was merely a piece in a much larger, darker puzzle. The truth that Alice hinted at was like a black hole, threatening to pull everyone into its orbit. As Alice sat in her cell, awaiting trial, Detective Harris's mind raced with the new developments. Who was Alice working for? And why had she killed Nathan in such a cold and calculated manner? It wasn't just a crime of passion or revenge. It was something far more insidious. Detective Harris decided to start at the beginning, back to the moments before Alice had met Nathan. He began reviewing her life, her history, and the people who had been in her orbit long before she ever met her husband. What he found was a woman who had been hiding in plain sight, living a double life, one that had been carefully constructed for years. Alice had come from humble beginnings. Her life before meeting Nathan was unremarkable, even a little dark. She had moved from town to town, using different aliases and leaving behind a trail of broken relationships and financial ruin. But the common thread throughout her entire life? Control. Alice was always the one who called the shots. And when she met Nathan, she knew she had found her perfect target. Alice didn't just fall in love with Nathan Steele. She studied him. She saw the power he wielded, the influence he had in the legal world. She saw a man who had everything, but was somehow lonely, vulnerable. Nathan had been raised with high expectations, always playing by the rules and always striving for perfection. He was the picture of success, but beneath the surface, something was missing. Alice knew that if she played her cards right, she could have it all. She could become the woman Nathan couldn't live without, the woman who would stand by his side as he climbed higher and higher. But Alice's love for him wasn't love at all. It was a carefully laid trap. She had already set her sights on something more, something that Nathan couldn't provide. As Harris dug deeper, he uncovered a connection between Alice and a mysterious group of wealthy, powerful individuals, people who had been controlling things from the shadows. A group whose influence spanned across multiple industries, including politics, law, and business. Alice wasn't just married to Nathan. She had become part of their world, a world where loyalty was bought and betrayal could cost you your life. But Alice wasn't just a pawn in their game. She had been manipulating Nathan all along. As Harris learned more about Alice's dealings, he realized that her marriage to Nathan was never about love. It was about control, about securing her place within this dangerous network of powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The moment Nathan had been killed wasn't just the tragic death of a newlywed. It was a calculated power play. Nathan's life insurance policy, his vast wealth, and his legal expertise were all part of the larger scheme. Alice had murdered him because he was no longer useful to the people she worked for. He had become a liability, but the investigation was far from over. Alice's role in Nathan's death was just one part of a much bigger conspiracy. And as Harris began to piece everything together, he realized that Alice wasn't the only one to blame. As the case began to unravel, another shocking twist came to light. Alice wasn't acting alone. There were others involved, high-ranking members of the secretive organization who had been pulling the strings from the very beginning. But who were they? And how far did their influence reach? Alice's lover, the man who had been helping her orchestrate Nathan's murder, was identified as one of the key players in this underground world of corruption. His name was Jason Hayes, a businessman with ties to criminal organizations that spanned across continents. Jason had been the one to plant the seeds of betrayal in Alice's mind, convincing her that killing Nathan was the only way to secure her place in the elite circles they both longed to join. But even as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Harris found himself facing another question. What was Alice's true motive? Was she simply a woman driven by jealousy and revenge, or had she been manipulated by Jason and the shadowy figures who had shaped her life? Harris couldn't help but wonder if Alice had ever truly been in control, or if she had been a pawn in a much larger game all along. As Harris's investigation reached its peak, the truth began to slip through his fingers. He had enough evidence to bring Alice to trial, but the higher-ups in her powerful network were already working to discredit the investigation. Witnesses started disappearing. Key evidence went missing. It seemed that no matter how hard Harris pushed, the conspiracy was always one step ahead. But there was one thing that Alice hadn't counted on. One person who could expose her for what she truly was. The woman who had been manipulated, used, and ultimately betrayed by the very people she had sought to align herself with. Just as Harris was about to close the case, a shocking phone call changed everything. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was Jason Hayes. But instead of trying to hide, he was offering a deal. He wanted to talk. He wanted to confess everything. You want the truth? Jason's voice crackled through the phone. I'll give you the truth. But it's not just Alice you need to look at. There's a lot more at play here. And trust me, you don't want to know who's really behind all of this. The revelation sent a chill down Harris's spine. Jason Hayes knew things that could tear the entire case apart. Detective Harris had spent weeks piecing together Alice's tangled web of lies. Every new piece of evidence led him deeper into a world of corruption and deceit that he never expected to uncover. But the real shock came when Jason Hayes, Alice's lover and a key player in the conspiracy, agreed to speak. He promised to reveal everything: the connections, the players, and the terrifying truth behind Nathan Steele's murder. Jason's confession was just as chilling as the crime itself. It's not just Alice, Jason had said, his voice low and filled with a cold certainty. She was never the mastermind. There's someone bigger, someone pulling the strings. You need to look at the people who have been hiding in the shadows, the ones you don't even know exist. They're the ones who run this show, and they're the ones who decided Nathan had to die. Jason's words sent a ripple of unease through Harris. There was more to this than a simple love affair gone wrong. Alice's murder of Nathan wasn't about revenge. It was part of something much larger. A network of corruption that stretched across borders, reaching powerful figures in politics, law, and business. Harris's mind raced. This was no longer just about a wife killing her husband for money or jealousy. It was about power, control, and a dark system of influence that could erase anyone who got in its way. Jason continued, revealing disturbing details about the organization Alice had been involved with. He spoke of powerful people, politicians, businessmen, and even law enforcement officers, who were all part of the same sinister network. Alice had been seduced by the promises of wealth and power, but when she became too much of a liability, she was discarded, just like Nathan. But it wasn't just her murder that had been planned. There had been others, other deaths, other sacrifices, all made to protect the interests of the powerful few who controlled everything from the shadows. Jason's confession revealed the unthinkable. Nathan's death had been orchestrated not just by Alice, but by the very system he had been part of. The network had manipulated Alice into doing their bidding, convincing her that Nathan was the obstacle to her power and her future. The people behind this weren't just criminal masterminds. They were the people we trusted the most. The ones who have power over us. The ones we thought were untouchable. And it wasn't just Alice who had been manipulated. There were others, people who were too scared or too loyal to speak up. The deeper Harris dug, the more he realized that the murder was just the beginning of something much more dangerous. But as Harris closed in on the final pieces of the puzzle, he realized something even more terrifying. The people behind the conspiracy were closing in on him. Jason's confession had made him a target. The deeper he investigated, the more dangerous it became. His own life was now in jeopardy, and the system he had once trusted was the very thing that wanted to silence him. With Jason's help, Harris identified a crucial piece of evidence, a series of encrypted documents that detailed the entire operation, from Nathan's murder to the other dark deeds committed by the organization. The documents, however, were in the possession of one final player, the man who had orchestrated everything from behind the scenes. And that man, Harris discovered, was none other than Nathan's mentor, a man who had been like a father to him, a man who had helped shape Nathan's career, and who had once been a powerful figure in the legal world. Nathan's mentor had been pulling the strings all along. He had used Alice, manipulated her into killing Nathan, and covered his tracks to protect his empire. With no time to waste, Harris raced against the clock to uncover the final truth. He tracked Nathan's mentor down, a man named Charles Westbrook, to an isolated estate in the countryside. Westbrook was waiting, his face a mask of arrogance and control. He knew that the investigation had reached its climax, and he was ready to end it on his terms. When Harris arrived, he was met with silence. Westbrook stood at the doorway of the grand estate, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're too late," Westbrook said with a smug smile. "You thought you could uncover everything? That you could stop this? It's over. The pieces are already in place. Nathan was just a casualty in a much bigger game. And Alice? She was never going to win." In that moment, Harris realized the horrifying truth. Alice was just a pawn in a much larger, more intricate scheme. She had been used, manipulated, and discarded. But it was Nathan's mentor, Charles Westbrook, who had truly orchestrated everything. The murder, the cover-up, the conspiracy. And the most terrifying part of it all, he had planned it all from the very beginning, using Alice as the perfect distraction. The confrontation between Harris and Westbrook was intense, a battle of wills that would decide not just the fate of Alice, but the future of the entire corrupt system they had uncovered. But as the two men faced off, it was clear, only one would walk away with the truth, and the other would pay the price. In the end, justice would not be swift. The truth would be uncovered, but at a cost. Harris, battered and broken, had exposed the darkness of Alice's world, and with it, the darkness that had been lurking just beneath the surface of the legal system, society, and even our very trust in those who hold power. As Westbrook was arrested and taken into custody, the final pieces of the conspiracy were laid bare. But the story didn't end there. The ramifications of the investigation rippled through the community, changing lives forever. Some were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered trust, while others were forced to reckon with the truth they had long denied. What do we do when the very system we trust to protect us is the one that betrays us? What happens when the lines between good and evil blur and the truth becomes a weapon? Alice Steele's story is one of obsession, manipulation, and betrayal. But it is also a story of power. How far people are willing to go to maintain control and silence those who dare to speak the truth. In the end, justice was served, but the question remains, was the cost of that justice worth the lives it destroyed? Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey. If you were shocked by the twists and turns in this case, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice.